In the meantime, I'm going to introduce Michael D. Higgins. And Michael D., as you know, former Minister for the Arts, nominated by the Labour Party as presidential candidate, former chairman of the Labour Party, and of course, I think the first Labour deputy, am I right, Michael D. for Galway? Academic? Since 1923, well, thank you. Thank you. Academic, sociologist, poet, campaigner for human rights nationally and internationally, and the first recipient of the McBride International Peace Prize in 1992. Would you welcome Michael D. Higgins?
Tohas arm venture, gloculation quid chiaptis, turmi a noctuile quercialina, agus tres liam lesion fiactus nashuter son, nahalina agus lesion Temple Bar Cultural Trust, asat on Disporasha Agru. I'm very pleased to be here, and I intend, Chairperson, to stick to your instructions of staying within 5 minutes. I have, in this 5 minutes, we're asked to outline why we are standing for the presidency, or, if you like, the main principles and how it might relate to the discussion and the debate we will have, I hope, later on. I've said that the 4 principles that I have structured my campaign on are a radical inclusive citizenship. I openly state that this is in contrast to the radical individualism that has brought us to the sorry pass of where we are at the present time, which includes the loss of so much of our economic sovereignty. We do not arrive at positions without having assumed, even quietly, values that support policies. A radical inclusive citizenship in a creative society. And by that I do not mean just only in the aesthetic end. I am a practitioner myself, but also a creative in everything we do, recombining science with art, looking at how we do our diplomacy, our international trade, all aspects of our life. And the country is full of ability and full of creativity. I believe innovation will come from that as a consequence, not as a lead principle. I think that that will enable us to have an Irishness that we can be proud of at home and abroad. And I think we will begin to then create a real republic. I also want in this couple of minutes to be able to introduce what I believe should be the role of the presidency in one important respect. The president has a constitutional role, a ceremonial role, but it is how the president exercises discretion, as you've heard, that makes the real difference. I have said that I will run a set of presidential seminars on particular topics, but in this just introductory minute, may I say this? It is important that the discourse be adequate, that it not be evasive. And you, and those of us who are practitioners and policymakers, and I had the privilege of being Minister for Culture indeed, and President of the Council of Culture Ministers in Europe in 1996. But there are aspects of the debate that are being evaded. Even in Ireland, the debate that began as a debate about the arts moved to a debate about culture in a flimsy way. And then it moved on, after other aspects of the economy had spectacularly failed, it moved on to a debate about the cultural industries. These are not the same debates, and it is important not to have a wasteful, polarised debate on saying you must choose between creativity of every citizen and the benefits that come, for example, from the 462 billion that is the value of the cultural industries in Europe, or the 5.6 million people who work in the cultural industries in Europe. As President, I want to make sure that the debate is inclusive in the sense that it speaks about the creativity of every child. Before I became Minister for Arts, Culture and the Gaeltacht, I was 10 years as chairman of the Galway Mayo Regional Arts Committee, and I saw small projects going on. But I felt and dealt with an opposition to the concept, for example, of community arts. In 1993, a leading Irish newspaper had a passage which said, after having one of my poetry books, it actually said, the worst thing about the ministers is policy, something about community arts that suggests that everyone is creative, when we all know that there are many people without an ounce of creativity in them. That was a view that had to be contested, and you cannot avoid it. You either are in favour of creativity socially defined as Professor Kieran Benson announced in 1979, and I borrowed and implemented his work. Or you say it's an individual thing. You have to debate that at least. You then talk about the public space. Is culture and cultural provision something peripheral to be provided for at a time of surplus, or is it basic and central as part of our citizenship and our inclusion? I believe it is. And then, finally, as part of the international debate about diversity, there are those two big reports there, our creative diversity, now old. Sadly, in parliaments, it has not been debated sufficiently. This was what I am saying. So let us have a full, deep, adequate, inclusive debate that is really about citizenship. I see this debate as being a debate about citizenship and culture's role in it.
Thank you, Michael D. Higgins. And just perhaps to make more concrete what it is we're talking about this morning, I'm just going to ask each of the candidates to talk to me for a minute about their favourite book. Mary, a favourite book, whether that be poetry or fiction?
It's very hard to choose. I think that one of my favourite books is probably Ernest Fisher's The Necessity of Art. But that's kind of, in a way, I had it a long time. It's in a blue cover and it's almost falling apart. More recently, I really liked Joseph O'Connor's Ghost Light because of the lyrical quality of it. But you know, about books, there was one strange thing that happened. I won't talk about honeymoons now, but before I got married, I got several copies of Herman Hesse's Steppenwolf. And I've been trying to work out ever since why I was getting that book as a present. But I liked Herman Hesse's writing as well. But no, I love reading anyway. And it's one of the things that... I'm very glad, by the way, that I made Gay's favourite piece of safe when I moved to Chester Beatty from Sherwood Avenue to Dublin Castle under excellent conditions and with a wonderful curator, Dr. Michael Ryan.
Having allowed you that score, Michael D., what about a favourite piece of music or a favourite painting?
Well, the favourite painting, without a doubt, I think is the one I like to go and see, and that is Caravaggio's The Taking of Christ. And I do remember every time I look at the painting, I see something different in it. Even a fragment of the painting is in itself very beautiful. It is a beautiful, wonderful, sensual piece of work, and I think it's great that we have it in the National Gallery. I remember that when I was minister, doing something, I hope it wasn't too improper, is that I got the gallery opened at night so that the Rolling Stones could look at it.
But I hope they were very grateful, Michael D.
On the music.
Okay.
Oh yes, great.
I will stop you after the music.
I'm eclectic about that too. You see, I like listening to the music for Zhivago, Jarre's beautiful piece. So, in particular, the piece Somewhere My Love. And also, I listen to Johnny Cash. I think the later Johnny Cash is just wonderful. And one of my favourites, but it's not from the later period, is The Beast in Me.
Other people, Michael D., talk about the later Beethoven quartets. You talk about the later Johnny Cash.
Yes. I think it's wonderful.
Going to some of the questions that we've had here from the arts community, I'm going to start with one that's a really important one. And it's that we know from studies that many people in Ireland don't participate in culture at all. I know that culture is a very wide definition. They don't go to the cinema, they don't go to concerts. So, Michael D., the idea of making the arts accessible, ensuring that each citizen actually, as you've already mentioned, has a chance to have a cultural element to their lives.
Yes, I don't want to look back, but part of my own period, 93 to 97, the building of places like Blanchardstown and Tala, Longford, Slashers Street, and Letterkenny and all of that was about access, about people not being that far from places where they would see major performances. But there is a real problem there, because at the end of 2006, a survey was carried out by the National Economic and Social Forum, and it showed that richer people were 3 times more likely to attend classical music, that in relation to cinema, 69% of them went to cinema, whereas 42% of working class people win. And then a curious and extraordinary but terrible finding is that people between 35 and 44 who have child-minding obligations and so forth were the least likely to find time to participate. So there is an issue about access. And what can you do? You can do by your presence. You're absolutely quite right. You're also by, I think, by having a spread of interest, of being interested in live performance. Because there's a great bit of evasion going on in relation to that, is that artists, for example, are still going to welfare offices and being asked, what is your real job? The fact of the matter is you can express solidarity with the importance and real work of creative artists of all kinds, be it in the visual arts, in music, in theatre, and so on, and dance particularly. And I think that it is important to do that and be encouraging by your presence, but also, as well as that, by your actually forcing the discourse. Why do we want artists to be poor in order to be brilliant? You see, why do we say that we're going to, in fact, that it's wonderful when everyone visits us, and isn't it great that we have people who can put on performances? The arts have to be made central, and then you have to look at, you could go to the schools, the whole integration, for example, of arts, sensibility and education, all of this. The President can do wonders if the President is really committed to it.
Right, and Puccini has a lot to answer for, really, doesn't he, the notion of the artist in the garret.
Yes.
We've all perhaps taken that on board.
It was certainly not sympathetic to artists when it brought in censorship, the end of the dance hall, the crossroad dances, all of that. So that's where we have to begin again.
At the crossroads, Michael D.
Necessarily, we have to ask about the importance of creativity, the importance of, Patrick Mason said that really, I think he said one time, that the whole purpose of the National Theatre, it was to enable every citizen to become something that they had not been able to achieve so far. I believe that. I think that it is a wonder. I think we're all in agreement on that. It is a matter of whether or not we will have an adequate debate about policy. Now, the President can't do detailed day-to-day policy, but the President can influence the atmosphere of the debate. I intend one of my presidency seminars to be about this whole area, about the cultural debate and access.
Okay, well, can I ask you all about specific things that you might do? And can I throw out a few ideas, starting, Gay, with you? For instance, raising the profile of artists in Ireland and to help people recognise how vital the arts is. Do you see a role for the President, say, in commissioning a symphony by an Irish composer, in having the setting up perhaps of a special art collection where every year one or two new Irish artists would find that their works were bought and displayed, having an artistic panel to advise the President, having somebody on the Council of State, maybe a rotating position every year for a national artist who would be regarded as a national treasure. And I'm sure we could find a wonderful Irish word for it, which would cover it. But using the position you have and the Áras itself to raise the profile of the arts.
I would look at the council. Well, I have to say that I have a fundamental problem with reliance and philanthropy, frankly. I think it's very good when people who have acquired enormous fortunes, which obviously that they don't need for their own consumption, decide to spend some of it in the public space, and that should be welcomed and admired. But really, what we're talking about, if you're talking about citizenship, you're talking about the right of every child and every person, older person as well. I launch frequently Bealtaine festivals and older people's homes, and I keep on saying the struggle I've had to claim the right to be creative right to the last breath you draw.
Yeah, but Michael,
but if you are going...
There's room for philanthropy.
Yeah, well,
yes, I wasn't just talking about philanthropy as one area.
There is, of course. But we're not building the United States. We're building what I believe would be a republic in Ireland. And I think that, for example, I gave the first grants, for example, to the musical instruments of Ireland. I looked at some of the instruments being played the other night in Naas for young European strings. But even as I did that, I also saw down at the end the change it would make if every child in Ireland had access to a musical instrument. I discussed this with Yehudi Menuhin, I remember, at the European level, and we actually had a line.
Michael D, you're such a name dropper.
Yes, I am, because why? Why? Because it would have made a huge difference, much more than any philanthropy, if every child in Europe had access to a musical instrument. It would make a huge difference in Ireland if every child had access to a musical instrument. And yes, of course I welcome you choose instrument thing. It is to be welcomed. And I do welcome philanthropy. But you know, one of the things about it is that I remember, and I'm sorry to mind me mentioning Menuhin, but the point is when he died, and when the idea died, which is a great pity. Yes. And I think that if European culture is to be meaningful, it will be when the whole level rises. The same thing arises in relation to putting materials for the visual arts into schools. Now, I think you can have state provision, but let us accept the principle that a state that does not accept that allowing creativity to be established in the states, in the system, through the schools and through the public space, that is a public duty.
Can I just say?
I'm going to, Sean hasn't had a word in here.
Disability, because when I was minister I couldn't read my own poems. But I tell you, you do learn a lot, because when I was recently in Manor Hamilton and Letterkenny and in other places, when you go into these venues and you see the wonderful changes that have been made in having acoustically fine places for performance and so on. You know, all the possibilities are there, but I keep emphasising the importance of the public world, and that's more important in times of unemployment and no growth. The choice that Europe never faces, and that is this: we'll make provision for the arts when growth returns. Not good enough. Okay. We'll make provision for the arts because it is part of our citizenship, a better agenda.
Right, we're going to the audience now to take some questions. Do we have roving mics? We do have roving mics. So if we can take some questions, and there's a man with his hand straight up here. Oh, there's somebody here as well. We'll come to you. Okay.
Hello.
Is it working?
Thank you very much.
There you are.
Willie White, Dublin Theatre Festival.
Willie, would you mind standing up so we can see you? Sorry about that. Thank you.
Willie White from Dublin Theatre Festival. Thank you very much all for your presentations. Very interesting to hear what you will be doing and what you propose. We have to remember that the President will be travelling around the world representing Ireland, and in the spirit of, as Michael D. Higgins and others spoke about, exercising discretion and drawing attention, you'll be able to avail of wonderful Irish art to represent Ireland abroad. However, a theme that's been running through your contributions, and that will be very much in the mind of the National Campaign for the Arts, is unless it exists, and unless it is invested in by the government, there will be nothing to share. And unless we have an education system that opens up the opportunity to participate in the arts to all of our citizens, not just the fortunate or the privileged few. People were alluding to the ESRI report of a few years ago. That's very alarming things about what the state manages to achieve at the moment. So I want to know what the presidential candidates will do to maintain, hopefully increase funding, and to make sure that through the education system that all of our citizens have an opportunity to participate in the cultural life as well as the political life of the country.
Okay, I'll make a point about this because I think it's important. No one is suggesting, I certainly am not, that you give people everything that they're looking for. But I do think it is important that we understand what is the importance of making particular provisions. I quoted Patrick Mason earlier, and he was talking about a more abundant and intense life for all the people. I'm simply saying that the cultural space is a legitimate matter for discussion as to its importance for creating social cohesion, for creating inclusion, for removing obstacles, and we should do that. Then after that, but here's, you see, everyone runs away in the end, I think, from the fundamental question. And that John McGahern said, you know, that the problem in Ireland is that people have been suggested that you have to choose between the family and the state, when in fact they needed both. What we need is an intelligent state supporting creativity. And yes, we're in times of scarcity and shortage, but let's look at the things that are important. For example, child development, inclusion, and these kind of things.
Okay.
I'm the literary manager at the Fishamble. One very brief point, which is that the last government figures showed from the department itself that for every euro going into the cultural sector, €3 coming back into the government by revenue. So if you want to close the deficit, you actually invest in the arts. Because sadly, we work for inexpensively and produce world-class work which has its product. That's not the point, though. The question I have for you: if you become president, you'll be president in 2016, or likely to be for the 100th anniversary commemorations. As president, from day one, building on the principles that you're outlining, how would you go about making sure that cultural and national success of those events, what would you like to see happening, and what could you do? Thank you.
Okay, Sean, straight to you.
Well, I think it's very important not to be forced to choose between what I say is between amnesia and amnesty. What I think I've been in favour of we being able to recognise different interpretations of the past and a kind of politics of memory, but able to park our versions so that we are able to move on. That's a very, very different agenda from those who would suggest, for example, that you should be amnesic, that you should choose not to remember. The Dublin that Sean O'Casey wrote about was a Dublin of tenements. The Dublin that he himself was conflicted in relation to the agenda of liberation, of freedom and of social justice. As well as that, when you think about the other dates, there's 1913, there's 1914, the start of the Great War, where many people died abroad. All of this, you have to be sensitive indeed. And I think that it's an interesting thing, because a culture that is confident about itself and that is open is in fact going to attract other people to it. The other thing, by the way, which is interesting, is that we're not in any danger here of somebody taking over the state and imposing anything. The fact of the matter is that when we founded the state in the 1920s, a number of the people who worked hardest to create it were excluded. And we had an administrative class that seamlessly moved into power and replaced those who had gone before them. As well as that, the legislation is simply the legislation on books, the legislation on censorship, the legislation in relation to the human body. None of this is an enormous success. So let us do it with imagination and freedom. Say, free at last. That's what I would like to see being celebrated.
1916. And perhaps your concept of it too in the context. I mean, is this being stressing very much in your campaign?
No.
That he represents?
Because you see, the difference is that I did all of this. I was there in 93 to 97 when we had to get 25% to access 75% grants from the European Union. That's what bought Collins Barracks. That's what moved to Chester Beatty.
Okay,
That's what built all the
we take the point. I'm going to take a few questions. This person here. Yeah. And there's one on the other side. Okay. We'll take two together. So we'll take this one and then we come back. Yes. Yes.
Hello. Hi, Peter O'Brien here. I'm sort of on the peripheries of the arts, really, because I design frocks. But from time to time, I work in the theatre.
You design beautiful dresses.
I just wanted to say, for 4 years, I was the outside assessor in the fashion department at NCAD. And I realised after 4 years, it dawned on me that in 40 years nothing had changed, because I grew up, and this really isn't about me, but I grew up on a council estate and poor, and I thought things like art schools weren't accessible to people like me. And I realised now, 40 years later, there are no working class kids in the fashion department at NCAD, and now fashion has become mediatised and very desirable. So if there are no working class kids in the fashion department, my God, there are certainly none in fine art and in painting. And I'm sort of on Michael D's side, because I think that the problem is really the most important part of the problem is there have to be really talented, creative children who live in places like Tala and Finglas, but they don't believe that these things are accessible to them. So what can a president do to make this seem not so elitist and not so far away? Because truly, nothing has changed in the 40 years since I was a kid. There are no working class kids certainly in the fashion department.
Yeah.
And maybe I'm rehashing old territory that you've spoken about, but it's something I feel quite strongly about.
Yeah, and I think it's a really important one. And we'll just take one other point and then go to the panel on that. Yes.
Sadly, listening to the panel, not one of you mentioned the media in terms of the importance. For instance, in your election campaigns, radio, TV, and the press must be hugely important for you. For instance, I'm a professional folk singer-songwriter, and my business is a disgrace at the moment, because if you consider IMRO's, the royalties collected by IMRO, every year annually, airplay is less than 7% for Irish music nationwide. And in fact, I spoke to a chief executive recently in the music industry, and this is more damning, because what he said to me, and it has been agreed by many other people, that about 5% in the music industry control 85% of the wealth. Now that doesn't show, that shows a total disregard.
Okay. So what's your question then?
My question is, if you become president,
yeah,
will you consider looking at the media, because the media is so important to you? It's as important to me as an artist. Would you consider looking at the media in terms of helping to support Irish artists?
Okay, we'll just go to the panel with one or two of those points. The whole question of, Michael D., what Peter O'Brien spoke about, no working class kids during the fashion courses in the arts colleges. What are we talking about? What needs to be done there?
I think that I agree with him, and I think that one of the things that you can do, for example, you could have an award. You could, I think we're all agreed in, you could do things with the Gash Awards, for example, and you could have an award for creativity by a child at primary level, whatever. I think in relation to this question here, if you think it's bad in relation to music, in relation to the games industry in Europe, I think 3 companies control 92% of the entire creativity. Now, we've seen in Dublin, for example, what happened with the Ballyfermot Rock School. We've seen what has happened in animation. And I think there are ways in which you can recognise this, and you can, through awards, encourage it. And I think that is incredibly important. I do think as well in relation to, for example, when I was chairman 20, 30 years ago, we commissioned the Dungeira Suite. The President can and should, that was an earlier question, could commission pieces of music and so forth. And you can use your opportunities to talk about the importance of creative music. See, I'm finished with this. The issue is as to whether you're in favour of a consumerist, passive version of culture or an active, participatory version of culture. It is as to whether you see yourself as the arrow or whether you see yourself as the target. All over Europe, frankly, in relation to many different parts of cultural product, as it is called, people are in fact the target rather than being the arrow. What you're talking about, what Peter is talking about, is how in fact you get creativity going as and you can do it at low cost.
Hello, my name is Alan King. I work for the National Association for Youth Drama. We're a nationwide organisation representing people who work in youth theatre and youth drama, volunteers, professionals. We have about 3,000 members, young people aged between 14 and 24. So I'd just like to ask you, how would you as president practically support and encourage young people and their participation in the arts? And part 2, how would you support professionals and particularly volunteers who work within that sector?
Okay, Michael D.
Well, first of all, I think it's very important to be straightforward. Anything I have said and anything I will say in this campaign will be achievable within the limits of the President's powers in Articles 12 and 13, for example, in the Constitution. So you can't have an influence in relation to hiring people or directing people in a particular way. But you can validate and encourage youth theatre and youth drama. And indeed I've done so over the years. Tommy Tiernan, for example, came out of the youth theatre in Galway. A provocative product, which is brilliant. But you can, I think one of the things that's very interesting about it, I'll give you an example of one of the things about as a person who travelled from Galway to the Dáil for 25 years. The Dáil failed several times to change its times for order of business. So the votes would always be at 8:30. They'd be over about 5 to 9. Just when all the deputies were too late to go to a concert, go to a theatre, or go to anything else. You can help youth theatre by going to see performances, by, for example, speaking about the importance of the development side of it publicly, so that local authorities can help with venues and can help with the small grants that are necessary. An enormous amount is in fact yielded up through youth theatre on very, very small budgets.
Okay, Gay on that question of, there's been a woman with her hand up here, and I want to make sure I include some women. Yes.
This is to all the candidates, but building on what Gay Mitchell said. You talked about wanting to be of public service. You do us a disservice if you thought that what we came along here to hear was that just clamause and flattery. We're very aware of the situation the country is in. Our question to you is, are you prepared to have a discussion and a discourse about where the state will invest? Of course you can't invest in the arts unless there's money. Of course you need to make sure that there are jobs in this country. Of course you need to enable citizens to participate in the life of the country by enabling access. You used a metaphor of a rose bush. What you're talking about is saying a rose bush will be nice if and when we have the money again. You've got to invest more fundamental things if, as I believe, we want to have a society and not just an economy. We need to invest in citizens and not just workers.
Okay, and there's somebody else who wants to, yes, yourself, yeah.
Hi, Lainey Hughes, Screen Producers Ireland. We just talked about getting more young people involved in the arts.
Yeah.
I really think it's really important that the President and the state as well, that they encourage arts companies, arts organisations to actually take on more interns, so that young people can get their foot in the door, especially people who don't have qualifications. Because that's our biggest problem, is that kids are going into like film schools in England and not even taking up internships here, like when they could actually be getting the experience that they need. And especially like even in secondary school and things like that, like you don't have to have, like I know so many people who have master's degrees that are still interning with like film companies and things like that when they should actually be getting paid to do it. Like it's time we started passing this down to like secondary school students as well so they can get involved.
Okay.
Also, Olivia just mentioned it there about you wanted to get more women involved in asking questions here.
Yeah.
But we actually don't have a lot of women in the arts at all. How are you going to encourage that?
Well, I think that, first of all, about the internships, it is very important. But internships should be a genuine developmental experience. And an internship in the arts raises great responsibilities in relation that you allow the intern to actually flow and develop. That's very important, and I think we would agree on it. In relation to the art of balance, I repeat again, there is a role for philanthropy, but it is after the state has taken responsibility for its cultural policy, which is aimed at inclusive citizenship. And I say finally, which is very interesting, the very first president, Douglas DeHeege, he was somebody who was writing many of his own speeches. I think it will be welcome if in fact people could look forward to a president who was writing creatively and imaginatively and inviting people to a fulsome vision for the future, something that is healing, beyond recrimination, but exciting and new, and as I've said, making a real republic.
Okay. To ask you all to leave fairly promptly because there's a film coming on in here later. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks very much.